Like when you come up with an idea and you think this is funny and then it doesn't work right, and then you keep kind of polishing it and honing it. It's like when swords are made, you know? They're like, you know, they get it all hot, and then they bang it out on the anvil, and then they stick it in the water, and then they bang it out some more, and then they stick it in the fire and get it red again. I mean, you know, to make a really strong sword, you gotta bang it out on the anvil.
You hear all the bull about marketing every day. Make your money in your sleep. My new offer is crushing it. My guru could beat up your guru. It's time to go right to the source and get the truth about marketing. With your host, the founder of copychief.com, Kevin Rogers.
Hey, welcome to The Truth About Marketing. It's Kevin Rogers here, and a special episode today. Not a marketer talking about a case study, what moved the needle on their offers, but my longtime friend Tom Rhodes, comedian, 30-year stand-up comedian. This man has the thickest passport I've ever seen in my life, and Tom, you were one of the first people to ever influence me in comedy, and you've never let up for a day. You are a lifer.
I remember I told you to go take the gig in Savannah.
And you remember that? You and Bennington were like, you have to go. So thanks for being here, brother. Really appreciate you being on.
Man, I love you to death.
This is going to be great because most of the listeners, or some may not know that I spent a decade touring the U.S. as a stand-up comedian. And for me, it was, I made a conscious decision that I was really fearful of becoming an old, bitter comic. You know, those guys we would work with when we were young?
Yeah, that's the greatest fear, and I think is the hardest thing to watch, is a bitter comedian and someone who's not enjoying it. And, you know, you always had, your act always contained the original energy of joy, you know, even when you were beginning. And you know, your time you spent in Chicago, you left an indelible mark there. People still, they know we're friends, and they still ask me about you. Oh, how's Kevin? Have you seen Kevin? And what's going on with him?
That's cool.
You know, I mean, you still have a lot of fans and friends for life that you made there from the period that you spent there.
Oh, that's great, man. It's nice to hear. Well, you know what I've always admired about you as an artist, Tom, is that you never lost that passion, even for a second. And, you know, you've been through some very interesting twists and turns in your career.
Yeah, and that's the toughest thing, you know, about being, and I've always had that fear also of being a bitter, angry comedian, because it's not my nature. But then things happen in your life. You know, my father was killed by a drunk driver. It was months after the accident, but, you know, he was in the hospital for like 3 months, and then. But, you know, he was an older man. Anyway, I had some anger over that. And then my sister, when she died of breast cancer, man, there was a couple years where it was really hard to be funny. And I had a lot of anger. And, you know, I thank God for being on stage, because I could, like, kind of take my brain and put it on a shelf and, like, go, you know, just to have this kind of fun time. But it was, I mean, and then you have tragedy strike your life, and then you look back on your life and you realize that, like, times you were, like, sad and heartbroken over a relationship is, like, comical, you know? And people, when they're young, you don't realize that. You just think, oh, my God, and I'm so, like, you know, my heart hurts and I'm sad. But, you know, it's, that stuff is just, you know, a pimple.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because you say you know, 1 hour you'd have on stage would sort of be your respite of everything you were going through, right? But
yeah, but people would say, I don't know how you can go on stage, like friends of mine.
Yeah.
You know, and my reaction was, you know, thank God for it. Thank God I have this. And if I didn't have comedy, I don't know what I would have done. And I don't know what normal people do in their life who don't have comedy.
Yeah, people say comedy is like therapy, and I always say, yeah, for the comic.
Yeah.
That's, you know, but would you bring any of those issues and that hurt on the stage with you and discuss any of that stuff, or was like the last thing you wanted to be speaking about?
No, and I still haven't worked it out. It's none of it's funny to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you love that our friend Lou is in the next room clipping his toenails?
Yeah, and I know that it's such a good microphone, you can pick it up. That's why this brand of microphone I love I do my podcast all over the world, and like you did it in Rome, and you could hear like, Italian scooters on the street outside, and
I love
I've done them in Asia, and you can hear like, Asian rain and different things. They're really great microphones.
Yeah.
So the nail clipping will definitely be in it.
Famous Lou Andrew. You know what? I should send those as gifts. If somebody leaves me a good review on iTunes, I'll send you one of Lou's toenail clippings. So many things we could talk about, Tom, but I thought it would be interesting for me to stay within the premise of this show. And the one thing I want to get from my guests, my theory is that if somebody's worthy of being on the show, then they've answered so how'd you get into this wacky business question 1,000 times, and my listeners probably don't need to hear that again, or they can find it somewhere else. I want to give them something that they can really take away and be inspired by to maybe try or attempt in their marketing or their artistry. And so I'll pose the question to you. What is the one thing you've done in your business that has produced the most surprising results?
Well, I think one of the most lasting things was making CDs on my own, and now they're played on Sirius, the comedy channels. But I mean, I made them on my own because I grew up listening to comedy records, and it was just my dream to make comedy recordings. So those were helpful in the long run. I've made a lot of YouTube videos, comedy ones, and I made a lot of travel YouTube clips from traveling the world, and
like high-end, well-produced.
Yeah,
stuff.
I put a lot of money into it, and it doesn't make any money, And I don't put commercials on it because it's only pennies. Right. That you get, even for like 1 million views.
So
you get like $20, $30.
Yeah.
Why slow somebody down to sit through a 30-second car ad for 2 minutes? So, you put all this money and effort into it, and then hiring an editor and making them look slick, and I didn't think that had much of an impact. But last week I was in Cincinnati, and this woman on the Saturday night sat at the front table by herself and watched both shows.
Wow.
She listens to my podcast, and then she'd watched like tons of my videos. And to have a super fan like that, I haven't seen in a few years. And then you talk to somebody after the show, and they want to take a picture, and then you realize, wow, I did touch this person.
Yeah.
Even if it is one person with the thousands of dollars.
Well, that's the thing is, I think you realize how deeply you touch somebody like that. You are part of her life. You're so much she thinks about. That's why I made it,
and it's like whenever I remember I made my first website in 2000, and the whole. I haven't been able to make money out of. I always say I'm the king of free content. When I made my first website, the whole idea I thought was I want to entertain the living shit out of somebody who wants to kill an hour at work. So I had writings on there and all this different stuff, and so my website. You can click to my videos and
TomRhodes.net.
Yeah, and
Elvis Around the World, still one of my favorites. You took an Elvis doll, and you have traveled. I mean, more than probably most humans could ever imagine. You've been everywhere.
Yeah, and that was a silly idea I had years ago. I had this Elvis doll, and I took its picture all over the world, and that was before the movie Amelie. When I was doing that. But I think that the thing, I don't look at it in a marketing way. And you're the only person I know who's involved in that kind of world. Which again, I didn't do it in a marketing way. I just did it as a passion, just to make art. I just want to make art and jokes and
follow your instinct.
I think that's all we have to leave after we die is the art that we made in our life. Be it children or a painting or a podcast. And so the thing that's had the biggest impact has been my podcast. And and friends of mine podcasts that I've been a guest on.
Mark Maron,
Joe Rogan. Last year, I was at the Soho Theatre in London, and I've been playing in London for 20 years, but I had always just played comedy clubs. Like the Comedy Store is probably the best comedy club in Europe. And this was my first time, and it's a really nice theater, and you got to be really great to play there. You know, it's creme de la creme, and it's in the Soho Theatre district of London. So it was my first time playing in London, where it's my name on the bill on the marquee, and I'm doing a solo hour show, and so I was nervous that, oh my God, I hope this place isn't going to be totally empty. And it was Valentine's weekend 2014, and I had such a great run and such great numbers, they invited me back 6 months later.
Wow.
And to play the Soho Theatre twice in 1 year is quite an accomplishment. Wow. And I talked to people after the show. I've never thought I was Mr. Fancy Pants. And that's why I do comedy. I like talking to people.
Yeah.
And so I'm talking to people after the show, and they listen to my podcast. I would say, probably 10 of the 30 people I spoke to. And they said, oh, and I first heard you on Joe Rogan's podcast, and then that led me to your podcast. And then people, it's not like when they see you doing a stand-up clip, I mean, that's why you want them to be your fan, because they like your comedy. But then when they listen to your podcast, or other podcasts that you've been on, they know more about you.
Yeah.
People knew personal details about me, which also can be kind of weird. It's like, oh man, it's almost like they've read your diary kind of feeling.
Because that's what a podcast is. It's not it's not like when we do radio to promote Yuck Yucks that weekend.
Right, you got to be funny within a 10-minute break.
This is a conversation you have. That's what's cool about podcasting.
And I've had so many conversations with friends of mine and comedians all over the world that a lot of personal things about myself.
Like Mark Maron takes every guest places, including President Obama.
Yeah.
Places they didn't expect to probably go when they sat down. So that's very cool. Now let's talk about. I'm glad it ended up being your podcast, because I love your podcast, and you've had. What I love about your podcast, and what makes it so unique. One, it's you, so it's unique, but you've always had this magic ability to end up with people, sort of hanging out with people. And this is not something you brag about or talk about, or you don't post pictures up on Facebook about it. But I know you intimately, so I know these things happen. But Wozniak, how many people are landing a Wozniak interview on their podcast? So things like that is a reflection of your actual life. Because it just so happens that you do touch people when they see your show. Because you're really no bullshit kind of comic. You're very direct. You're also very funny. But when people get Tom Rhodes, it's almost like they're instantly in a special club. So it's more intimate than just liking Dane Cook or some hack. Can I say that? Dane Cook hack. But so tell me about the Woz interview and other things that how has the podcast opened up new ways to communicate with people that you didn't have before, maybe?
Well, you got a guy like Steve Wozniak, and number one, he likes ground floor ventures. He's a guy who his entire life is inventing new ways of doing things.
Right.
So I don't know how many podcasts he's been on, but he's a huge fan of comedy. And he came to my show in Lake Tahoe. I was at the Improv at Harvey's Casino. Very nice room. And he was there last December. And I met him after the show, and I'm talking to him, and he's a great guy. And I was going to be in San Francisco the next month. And so we're hanging out, and we're talking, and he's in no hurry to leave. And finally I mustered the courage, and I said, I don't know if you'd be interested, but I'm going to be in San Francisco next month, and I have a podcast, and I'd love to record a chat with you. And he was like, oh my God, of course. And
wow.
he gave me his card, and his card is so cool, man. It's like this titanium card, and he said he had these kind of cards made after September 11th. They took away real silverware. I guess in first class they give you real knives and forks. And he said, I had these cards made so I could cut my steaks. And so I've got this card, and like you can cut things with it, but it's the whole so I mean that's the inventive mind of a creator,
right?
You know, and
solutions, yeah.
And I did this. I went down to Cupertino, and then he wanted me to meet him at this Chinese restaurant. And he shows up with his wife and his wife's parents and another older couple that was the friends. So we're sitting at this big, one of those massive, like in a Chinese restaurant, there'll always be that one table in the back that's like a big round table that seats like 10 people. So we're sitting there, and I didn't think I was going to have an audience. I thought
intimate, one-on-one.
Right. So we actually recorded that where he and I are talking, and these all these other people are sitting there listening and watching.
That's great. I love that you mentioned in the intro to the interview that you'd asked the owner, could he maybe turn down the music?
Yeah.
And he refused.
Yeah, he said,
hey, I'm running a restaurant here. This is how it sounds. And
yeah, but I'm talking to Steve Wozniak. And, the guy, Steve Jobs was the marketer.
Yeah, right.
Wozniak was the inventor.
Yeah.
He invented the machines that transformed my life and everyone else's. I mean, look how easy it is to do a podcast. Look how easy it is to edit and post videos and everything. It's like such a golden age to be a comedian, but also to be anybody, because you can do things on your own. And you don't, it used to be, if you wanted a radio show, you had to, deal with a radio station and their executives. You wanted to make a television show, you had to deal with networks.
Right.
And so, I've thought that for years that, eventually, and we're getting there faster and faster every day, that your website will be your television network radio station.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm working towards that. It was funny, I saw some people had tweeted something that Steve Wozniak said, in the future we're going to be the pets of robots. And he said that on my podcast in January. I was like, oh damn, that was the sentence I should have marketed that,
right.
that sentence with, because it was news that he had said that in an interview, and I was like, oh, he said that on my podcast 6 months ago.
I had that scoop. Yeah.
But another massive, and is the fact that that Steve Wozniak loves comedy, and he really liked my show. That is pretty much how that made that happen. And then another thing is, I was in New Zealand 2 years ago, and I got to interview Kim.com, who started megaupload.com, where all these movie files were traded, and he's on the FBI's most wanted list.
Wow.
He can't leave New Zealand. And that was that was also helpful when I got Steve Wozniak, because Steve Wozniak is friends with Kim.com and one of his great defenders. And Wozniak says, and Kim.com lays it out. He thinks it's the Obama administration is persecuting him because Hollywood gave him a lot of money for his campaigns, and that it was Hollywood that didn't get the $7.50 for Sister Act 2 or whatever was traded, and certain money wasn't in pockets and stuff. So Kim.com was a huge comedy fan. So I was on like the NPR of New Zealand. I was doing the New Zealand Comedy Festival, and the woman asked me, what's the one thing you want to do while you're in New Zealand? And I said, I know it sounds silly, but I'd like to interview Kim.com. I think he's demonized in the American media and Western media, and I think he was basically manipulating the tools of the internet when it first came on. And, they kind of made these rules based on what he did. And things changed, and he complied, and whatever. I said something very thoughtful about the guy, and I said, I think he's a really interesting guy. And so an hour later, he followed me on Twitter. And then I followed him back. And then we started direct messaging, and then the next thing you know, I get invited to his mansion compound.
Wow.
And like, he doesn't do many interviews. He's a difficult guy. So when I met Steve Wozniak, I was saying, hey, I did an episode of my podcast with Kim.com and blah, blah, blah. And then so his eyes light up. And those were, I thought, two really impressive guests to have on a podcast until Mark Maron had the president.
I think he's still shocked by that.
Yeah. But I mean, and I've done, comedians around the world, and my podcast, I thought, I meet so many interesting people in my travels.
Yeah.
And I've known so many comedians in all these different countries for years that would be the angle of it. But I mean, that's the thing on your podcast. You can do anything. I just did a book review a couple months ago of this Dillinger biography that I read. And I liked it. I think I'm going to do a few more of those.
Yeah. People like that a lot because everybody's stressed for time. And, if they have or have not read the book, if they have read it, they're interested to hear your take because they like the way you think. And if they haven't read it, it's a good, should I bother?
Yeah, and I just did a special 4th of July one. I was so moved by... I thought that was a pretty heavy week in American history where, healthcare was ratified, and then gay marriage, and then that shooting in Charleston just absolutely shook me to my core. And then the reaction of forgiveness from the people, the loved ones and family and stuff. So I talked with 3 people for my special 4th of July episode. Scott Capurro, this iconic gay comedian. I think he's the Jackie Robinson of gay comedians because he broke into the straight clubs. When I moved to San Francisco in '91, there was a gay club in the Castro where they played, and then the other clubs were the straight clubs.
Wow.
So I talked with him about gay marriage. My friend Gilbert King, who won the Pulitzer Prize 2 years ago. Next week's episode is with I did a full episode with him. But I did one with him about, because his books deal with kind of civil rights issues.
Yeah.
So we talked about civil rights things. And then to get the right-wing Republican angle, I interviewed my brother. So you can do anything you want now.
Right. So, what you thought it would be when you started out, it sort of takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, when it started, I thought, I'll just be drinking. I'll just drink with some friends of mine and talk. And we'll, be cool. That'll be my thing. We'll be drinking. Now I haven't drank in a year and a half.
Yeah, congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm a
lot less argumentative since I stopped drinking.
And your skin looks great.
Thanks, buddy.
I want to talk for a minute about the culture of comedy because... I probably take it for granted a little bit because I've been fortunate enough to be around it for a long time and have relationships with comics who I started with back in 1987 that still go on today. And but I am able to appreciate more and more the longer I'm sort of away from the heart of it, how special it is. Billy was in town last week, and we went down to Coconuts after his show. And, all these comics were there. Danny Bevins and Steve Eric and, these guys that I haven't seen in that context in a long time. And what I loved about it, Tom, was at one point I kind of look around and there's these pockets of dudes hanging out and just laughter, little bursts of laughter. And you look over there and somebody's acting out a bit and everybody's waiting for the punchline. And then it's just like that's not everyday life for most people.
Right.
Right? And, but comedians, we live there.
Right. Well, remember I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
My uncle, who used to deliver packages for Federal Express years ago, told me, just remember, Tom, when I go into a bank or an office to deliver a package, nobody claps. There's no applause.
You're making
bits like a comedian, you start your job to applaud.
Right.
Would you please welcome Kevin Rogers?
That's right. Clocking in. Yeah. So, but what I'm interested in is, so you've been to just about every continent. You've performed on every continent except
Africa and Antarctica.
Okay, incredible. And so you're a citizen of the world, literally. I mean,
you're going to make a comedy igloo one day.
Is it this? How different is it in different places structurally, how they structure the shows, and mostly sort of mindset. Are comics everywhere? Is it that same, twist of logic in their thinking that gets them onto the stage, no matter what their world looks like? Or is
more or less. And what's really been exciting is, I've been going to Asia for 15 years, and in the last 10 years, there's comedy scenes all over Asia now. And you got places like Kuala Lumpur, which I love very much. Because it's a Muslim country. But it was formerly an English colony, so they all speak English. So, but their populace is Malay Muslims, Indian Hindus, and then Chinese, Christian, Buddhist, whatever. So that's the ethnic makeup of their comedy scene. So, and these guys are like ruthless, making fun of each other's like religions and ethnicities. You think that they would be more, politically correct or whatever, but my wife is of Indian descent, and I've got a couple of Hindu jokes that I've written that in the United States gets absolute silence. I do them in Malaysia, and the place goes wild because they know certain elements of Hindu.
Right.
And there's things like that. There's different, like, my favorite kind of audiences are multi-ethnic, multinational, and kind of well-informed.
Yeah.
So that's why I love playing in London, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Hong Kong, Sydney.
Yeah.
Those are my favorite places. Amsterdam is always... But Amsterdam, their first language is Dutch. So, but it's like, I always describe Amsterdam as like a New York City if it was a village.
Yeah.
Because you got people from all over the world, but it's just like really kind of a village scale.
When you play somewhere like China, are you only playing to expats or people who are there on a working thing for is it all American audiences or
no? You've got expatriates of every flavor. You got. I mean, we really won the lottery when it comes to the language because the international language of business is English for the internet. So. Anybody who's anywhere in China or different parts of the world, they usually speak English. That's the money language, and so you got English, Irish, American, Australian, Canadian, all these different English speaking expatriates that are there. But then the Chinese people that are there were usually educated in other countries. In Australia, Ireland, America, Canada, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Or they grew up in those countries. And so it's funny, you'll be in China and you meet a guy and he speaks English with an Australian accent or an English accent or a Canadian accent because that's where they grew up. And then the Chinese people that were sent to university in these different countries speak English and or are huge comedy lovers. I was in Beijing 2 months ago, and it's a great gig there called The Bookworm, and it's a bookstore with a bar in the middle of it. It seats 100 people, and I love the way they promote it is Tom Rhodes in the humor section. And there was I would say 20 of those 100 people in Beijing were Chinese people that were working on their English, and they thought this would... Like there was a girl sitting in the front row, and by her blank face, I could tell she wasn't grasping everything I said. But that's a rarity.
But is it only...
Normally, so you're there with expatriates, but half the audience is Chinese, and they have an excellent grasp of English.
They do, and also sarcasm and more subtle things come across the...
I had this Chinese girl ask me about the meaning of an expression that I used after the show, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
She didn't want to walk away not knowing what I meant by this, what I implied by this one sentence.
Wow, that's great. You remember what it was?
I'll have to tell you later.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. last thing I'll ask you, and thanks for doing this, bro. I really appreciate it.
I love you to death, bro. I would mow your lawn if you asked me.
That's excellent. That would be fun to watch you mow my lawn. I'll be standing in the window.
And if my podcast doesn't get more listeners soon, I just might have
to. Let's just talk a minute about joke writing. This is something that, as a guy who's stayed on the road for, is it 30 years? Is it my?
I started in 1984, and I was in 11th grade. I graduated high school in 85 in June, and I went on the road, I think, 1 month later. So wow. July or August of 85, I went on the road. So yeah, it's been 30 years.
Incredible.
I've been a working comedian.
That's incredible. It's
Yeah, wow, it's July right now. Yeah,
you're there.
30 years.
30 years. Congratulations. Incredible. People wonder, like, how does it work? First of all, a lot of people don't even realize that a stand-up comic has to write their own material.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for a few reasons, and it's also stressful because it takes a long time to hone a joke. And once you sort of get it and it's there, it's a reliable thing. It's a silver bullet in your holster. But
I call that banging it out on the anvil. Like when you come up with an idea and you think this is funny and then it doesn't work right, and then you keep kind of polishing it and honing it. It's like when swords are made, Mm-hmm. They're like, they get it all hot and then they bang it out on the anvil and then they stick it in the water and then they bang it out some more and then they stick it in the fire and get it red again. I mean, to make a really strong sword, you gotta bang it out on the anvil.
Love it. So, do you have a process? That people famously know about Jerry Seinfeld saying, I'm going to write a joke a day and I'm going to put an X on the calendar. I'm never going to break this chain. And some jokes he's been working on 7 years, and other times he'll write 5 in a day that all work. You have a structure like that, or?
Well, I've never been able to okay, I'm going to sit down at 3 o'clock and write some jokes. That's never been my style. Mm-hmm. For me, my best ideas have always come out by having intelligent conversations with intelligent people. And then, you consciously make notes. I always keep notebooks on me. Yeah. I like pen and paper. Been a big pen and paper guy. Mm-hmm. So, you say something funny, or you say you have a funny opinion about something, and then you just remember it. Just excuse yourself from the table and go to the next room and make a note.
Yeah.
Or I don't care. I'll pull out my notebook right in front of people and do it. So I've always done that, and it's the oldest form of joke writing, which I just started experimenting with a few years ago. Is free form writing. Christopher Titus, who I think is doing brilliant work. I did this comedy festival with him in Aspen in February, and I was asking him about his joke writing, and he said he sits down every day and writes for an hour. He said whatever it is, you just sit at the thing, and any thought you have comes to your mind, just type it on the computer. Which I've never been a computer writer. I've always been a pen and paper guy. So. And whatever it is, good or bad, and it's just, no one's going to see this. And he said, always at the 45-minute mark, that's when the good shit starts to come. And he goes, now, I usually end up writing for longer than an hour. You'll have pauses where you sit there and just empty your brain and just kind of go into this meditative state, and then put your fingers back on the keyboard and banging it out. So I've only done that, I think, 10 times, but I've enjoyed it. I'm going to try and do that more. We live in a much more accelerated world now, and I think there's greater comedians than there ever was now. In the 80s, comedy boom, it was a lot of suburban white guy, straight male thing.
Yeah.
Now there's, great ethnic comedians, people of different sexual orientations, just
breaking down the barriers.
It's just voices of every kind.
Yeah.
And there's brilliant comedians all over the world. And also very bad ones, But usually things that are close to your heart. It's interesting how some jokes will come out kind of perfect when you first think of them. Joke that I've done forever about my family are all hardcore Christians, and they're all overweight, and they're all trying to lose weight on these low carb diets where you don't eat bread. That's funny. Christians not eating bread. And Jesus said, take this bread and eat it. It is my body. And the disciples said, Jesus, we're all on low-carb diets. We appreciate you dying for our sins, but we're all trying to slim down a little bit. We just want to look good in the painting. You know that they were dieting because they want to look good in the Last Supper painting. I mean, that joke kind of came out perfect.
Yeah.
You know, and then like when a joke comes out perfect, you're like, fuck, did someone else already come up with this?
Yeah.
And I thought of this. And then you got other jokes that you really do have to bang it out on the anvil and you work on them. Some jokes you put down, you just stop doing it. Okay, that never has gotten a laugh. And then you put it down, and then you go through an old notebook years later and go, I mean, that was a decent thought. And then you do it, and then somehow it's just magically funny again. Maybe it's your intonation or something you've added to it. I've got a new thing that I've been working on, which it doesn't get a huge laugh, but I because you know me, I'm constantly reading, and my favorite kind of comedy is always kind of informative comedy where you learn something from,
right?
You know, or just ways of looking at things a little different, or just what I like to call knowledge nuggets. So, and that's another, I just started making these little videos of knowledge nuggets. I think this will probably be one of the next ones. But, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you can help me make this funny. I've always been obsessed with Native Americans. And without a doubt, one of the fiercest tribes was the Apaches in Arizona. At one time, their leader was Geronimo. And there were several times in Geronimo's life where he was surrounded by American cavalry soldiers on the rocky cliff mountains of Arizona. And to get away, he jumped off the cliffs and got away. And for that reason, military people all over the world, when they jump out of airplanes, they yell, Geronimo! Geronimo spent the last 20 years of his life on an Indian reservation in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He died riding his horse home drunk from a bar. He fell off of his horse, slept in a ditch, and died of pneumonia. So it's actually, when you fall down drunk is when you should yell Geronimo. Geronimo! So that's like one of my new jokes now. And I mean, it's more like just a factual story. And apparently military people don't yell Geronimo anymore.
But that doesn't matter. Let's not let facts.
The truth can really fuck up.
That's right. Let's never let that get in the way. That's great. I love it. All right. Well, Tom, this was golden, man. Really appreciate it.
I love you like a brother, Kevin Rogers. Yeah, and I'm very proud of you. And of all the people doing a podcast, your brain should definitely feed out into the airwaves.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah.
I love you, man.
I love you too, man.
All right. Talk again soon.
Respect.
Once again, I want to thank my guest, Tom Rhodes. What a great comic. If you ever get the chance to see Tom live out there in a comedy club, do not miss it. You can also check him out at Tom Rhodes, that's RHODES.net, to follow his adventures around the world. Thanks again for listening. I always appreciate it. And you can see more and learn more at copychief.com/TAM. We'll see you next time.